Good morning, Nat. Thanks very much for taking part in the Business Spotlight series.
Good
As
morning. Good to be with
always,
you.
not at all. As always, I'm going to hand it straight across to you to introduce yourself and what you do.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning, Ed. I am the founder of Crystal Vantage. We're an investigations company based in the West End of London, and we operate around the world. And what we mainly do is gathering information, evidence, intelligence, often that's difficult to obtain when there's a big legal dispute. And that legal dispute usually tends to be something around fraud or white-collar crime, or a big contract or agreement or undertaking that hasn't been performed on. And our client, which might be a private individual, a family office, a corporation, sometimes a government, needs to go after a party that has effectively defrauded them or failed to uphold their duties. And a good way of thinking about it, if you like, is if you imagine a courtroom and you've seen suits and people going into court and lawyers looking very sharp and winning cases, we do some of the work that builds the information and the evidence inside that case. Some of our work never sees the light of a courtroom and ends up being settled privately, and some of it ends up in quite high profile litigation. But so we are sort of diggers behind the scenes for information and evidence, and we can delve into a bit more detail on that if you like.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. How long have you been doing it for?
I've been running the business for 5 years, and I've been in this industry for about a decade.
Wow. And how did you get into it?
I fell into it by accident, actually. I studied languages at university. I studied Arabic and politics, and I became very fascinated in the Middle East. And I was recruited as a young, fresh-faced graduate into a company that needed Arabic speakers for business intelligence work. And I began to be very fascinated by this work, and I worked there for 4 years, and I built up all this intrigue and interest and quite a niche set of skills that I never anticipated I would have. And then there was this thing tickling inside me that I've always known I wanted to run my own business and be entrepreneurial. And I took the plunge and set up Crystal Vantage, and we focus on a niche of the investigation sector, if you like. There are lots of companies in our world that do things like due diligence and market entry reports and country risk. We really focus on contentious, difficult disputes and where we really need to unearth information to help our clients move forward. So that's kind of where I like the challenge and the chase, and that's kind of how I ended up doing what I'm doing.
Fantastic. And you mentioned that it can be obviously some quite high profile cases, or it can be involving governments. We already briefly spoke before about the pictures behind you. So I'm guessing there's an international element to what you do.
Yeah, almost all the work is international, and there's a simple reason for that. If you think about these high-profile cases where one party owes another party a lot of money and where they're failing to perform on that, they usually live quite an international lifestyle, and so locating them and their assets is a very international endeavor. And B, they tend to have structured their wealth in quite evasive ways to make it difficult for creditors or counterparties to go after. And those complicated ways of structuring wealth, as you might have read in newspapers or seen in things like the Panama Papers, etc., they kind of give a small window into this kind of multi-layered, multi-jurisdictional way of structuring wealth. And that means that, on any given day, you could be looking at a ski chalet in Switzerland, which is owned by a company in the Caribbean, which is owned by a trust in Luxembourg, which is owned by another trust in the Cook Islands. And each one of these is another layer of the onion that needs to be peeled away. And so you need to be quite good at digging around in different parts of the world and quite nimble, able to move your investigation across jurisdictions in order to sort of arrive at a full picture that's going to ultimately shed light on what your client needs.
Indeed. And I suppose in terms of the clients, do you get sort of private businesses coming to you as well then?
Yeah, you tend to get private companies. I suppose there's a few different categories. Yes, you've got corporations who are involved in contentious litigation, right? They need to go after some party that's being extremely difficult, usually in a faraway part of the world. You've got private business people who have a penchant for exotic deals, and some of those are fantastically successful and lucrative, but some of those are difficult and tricky and get mired in either litigation or more often kind of disputes that are not quite in court, but where someone has wronged them on the other side of a deal and is not quite being cooperative, or has disappeared, or has moved money, or is being disingenuous with them. And those types of people really value a discreet investigations company helping them. And then you have law firms who are staffed by, many of them very sharp and astute and intelligent litigators and arbitrators, whose business it is to go after these types of individuals. And those kind of firms also have I think, an appreciation for capable and accurate and good quality investigators who can help make their work just that bit more effective and easier and better informed. So the client profile does differ a little bit.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of the industry itself, what would you see as being the challenges for the area that you're in?
It's a really good question. I suppose there are a few major challenges. I think one of them is the constant dichotomy between being effective, gathering information that's really useful. Some people have this idea that, investigators are effectively glorified Googlers. There are some of those. They're not really worth their salt or really worth paying for. So on the one hand, you need to be a really capable investigator, able to unearth information. And on the other hand, you have to be really careful to work both ethically and lawfully in all the jurisdictions where you're operating. And there is a tendency for these two things to be in conflict with each other. And just as there are those glorified Googlers on one end of the scale, there are also your rogue investigators who will do whatever you want, guns for hire. And those aren't particularly helpful either. Number one, they produce a huge liability for the client. If a client pays for someone to hack an email, they might jump up and down in excitement, at the first minute of receiving that document bundle, but they have broken the law. They could be prosecuted for that. And they could also be scrutinized in a courtroom if ever the audit trail is reproduced of how information was obtained. Far from helping the client to sort of recover funds that they might be owed, actually, it might end up making them liable for a huge amount. And so one of the big challenges of our industry is to be effective, ethical, and lawful at the same time. And I would say that's a central challenge. I suppose the other one is to constantly adapt to the types of needs for investigations. In the post 9/11 world, one of the big products that was needed mainly by financial institutions and big corporations was external due diligence, because you had all of these anti-money laundering regulations, anti-terror financing regulations that were brought in by the US, by the EU, by other countries. And all of a sudden, these big organizations needed to comply with huge amounts of new regulation. And they had very high-risk clients on their books. They had, members of royal families and politically exposed individuals and, individuals who may have been connected to organized crime. And they were all of a sudden required to have independent third parties scrutinize some of these high-risk clients. So in those days, the business intelligence world really was focused on servicing those kinds of clients. A lot of those clients have actually learned to bring those functions in-house. And I think the more interesting part of the industry, and actually the place where, separates the wheat from the chaff, if you like, the real investigators with good skill sets can really stand up and be counted, are in longer term assignments where there is conflict or dispute or concealment of information. And you need to be really skillful at unearthing that. And that's, I think, another one of the challenges of the industry, of responding to identifying what are the emerging needs and demands in the industry, and then providing effective answers to those.
Yeah, interesting. And I suppose connected to that, for your business, what are your aspirations for its growth in the next 5 years?
I would like us to be one of the most effective investigations companies in the world. I don't want us necessarily to be the most famous, but I want those who need to know about us to know about us. I'd like us to grow, but I wouldn't like that to be at the expense of quality. So we are, at the moment, for example, hiring for a new investigator focused on human intelligence gathering. And we will interview until we find exactly the right candidate. So I would like us to sort of be known as a gold standard in the industry. And I think that another one of the aspirations that I have is I would like us increasingly to branch out into the business of generating recovery of assets, and not just identifying assets, but continuing to do what we're doing in even deeper level, which is to help clients at the end of the day see the money return to them. And I think people sometimes see investigators as the people who are going to find things, and the lawyers are the people who are going to go and argue for them in court, and the judge is the one who's hopefully going to rule in their favor. These things are joined up efforts, and I think that everyone involved needs to be quite committed and invested in the recovery itself. And that can create some quite creative types of solutions that are not necessarily being pursued conventionally in today's day and age.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's very different, very interesting. And in terms of your experience as a business owner, what's been the biggest learning?
Wow, there's been a lot of learning curves. Time management is probably really high up there. When you're a business owner, the buck stops with you. That's an obvious thing to say, which means that if anything goes wrong or is subpar or needs your attention, there's no one that you can or want even to pass it on to. So naturally, there's this big bottleneck that can kind of gather up towards where you are. And one has to, I think, learn very effectively to prioritize the things that are high priority, to take on cases that can be delivered effectively in the timescale promised, and to surround yourself by capable people whom you trust to help you in that endeavor. And it's a constant battle to make sure that your time is used effectively, and that the whole cart keeps moving forward, and doesn't stop because you've got 17 other things to do this morning.
Indeed. Yeah, it's that big challenge, especially I guess with a sort of a consulting type business where it's very much about that skill. It's hard to just to automate it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
becomes a challenge. Makes sense. And I suppose as a final thing, is there any news or any offer you would like to extend to the audience?
My offer I would extend to the audience is, I hope you will never need our services. But if ever you do, one of the things to look out for, and this is something that we offer, but actually this is a piece of advice I would give to anyone who's looking to hire an investigator. Speak to someone who will speak to you and give thought and attention to your case for a reasonable period of time before offering a service to you. What we offer is very bespoke and very tailored, and the thing that you're going to need, the investigation you're going to require, the intelligence you're after, is naturally unique and different from the next case. And I think the mark of an effective investigator is someone who's able to stop and really give thought to the client's requirements, and then offer a service. And that service might be quite expensive. It should always be value for money. But I think it needs to be something that's really adapted. So I suppose we don't do coupon vouchers in our world, but one thing that we do is, as a boutique company, we put our heart and soul in the cases that we take on. So a sort of promise that goes out to anyone who's thinking of using us or approaching us is, before we ever get a proposal out to you, we will think quite carefully about your case and what's going to be the most effective answer or solution to you. And I suppose anyone in your audience who's unfortunate enough to perhaps need our services can definitely be confident that they will get that from us.
Fantastic. That's a great way to round it off. Thanks very much for that. It's been really interesting finding out what you do. It's a bit different, and great to get your insights into the industry as well.
That's a real pleasure. Thank you, Ed.